Welcome to another episode of Work Comp Talk. In today's episode, we're going to be diving right into one of the most asked questions an injured worker can essentially make. And that is, why does workers' comp pay so damn little? We want to thank our sponsors today, Pacific Workers, the lawyers for injured workers. And joining us from Pacific Workers is none other than the president and the best attorney in Northern California. That is Bilal Kassem. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So tell me, what's up? Why are they so cheap?
I think you could blame the legislature for that. No, in all seriousness, workers' comp was created as a carve-out to personal injury law. The idea being that if you could sue your employer every time you got hurt at work, and let's face it, employers do a lot of stupid stuff all the time, that employers would all be bankrupt.
Right.
And insurance rates are set on what they call experience modifications, which means the more accidents that happen, the higher the insurance premium is and such. And so a lot of high-risk industries, whether it's construction, police officers, firefighters, people would get sued all the time.
Right.
And so workers' comp was created as a way to really, they say it's to ensure workers get benefits, but really it's also a way to create savings so that employers and insurance companies don't go bankrupt.
It's a way for the insurance money to just still keep increasing because insurance make a ton of money.
They do. It's for profit. The idea is
Exactly.
taking more in premiums than you pay out in claims and give the profit to your shareholders and your CEO and whoever else is at your company and such. So,
Of course.
but things like permanent disability and temporary disability are set by statute in California. Those are non-negotiable case by case. And so, for example, temporary disability, there's a max rate, meaning you can't get more. I think it's $1,500 a week right now. So if you make $2,000 a week in your job, you only get $1,500 max.
Yeah.
So you don't get that extra compensation. And same thing for permanent disability. Permanent disability is paid at a max rate of $290 per week right now. So your permanent disability level is based off of your permanent disability rating, which is what the doctor decides, and then that sets the monetary value of your case.
So when were these numbers put in place? When was the last time anyone reviewed what it costs to live in California? Because it's no joke.
Yeah, especially over the last couple of years. But temporary disability gets adjusted every year. So just a couple of years ago, it was $1,200 per week. And so the temporary disability rates by statute are adjusted every year based on essentially state average wages, cost of living, and stuff like that. So temporary disability goes up pretty much every year.
Right.
Permanent disability has not changed since 2014.
Interesting.
And for the entire state of California. It doesn't matter whether you live in Fresno, you live in Red Bluff up north, you live in Los Angeles or San Francisco, everyone gets the same rate, which is kind of silly to some extent because if you live in a cheap cost of living area or you live in an expensive cost of living area, no one cares. No one cares if you have a house or a family you have to provide for and stuff. The rate's the rate.
Which then sucks because it's the reason why we're even having this conversation in the first place. A lot of people can't make ends meet with that type of money. Like, are you kidding me? And on top of that, there is no such double dipping into, hey, let me get some state disability while I'm at it. So because I just mentioned this, there's also a question that kind of intertwines with that. Why can't I kind of double dip?
One, the EDD won't pay you beyond what their obligation is as an entity. And what they do is they have their max rate that they pay. So like if you have state disability that you're paid into through your paychecks, you can withdraw a rate, I think it's 55% is the max EDD rate that you can get. So if what you're receiving from workers' comp exceeds that, they're not going to pay you anything.
Of course not.
If what you're receiving from workers' comp is less than that, then they pay what's called differential, meaning they'll pay you the difference. But even then, it's what you'd be entitled to under workers' comp law, which still in some cases isn't enough either. And so what you see a lot of cases is people have permanent disability payments advanced to them throughout their case. And state disability will pay the difference between permanent disability and temporary disability rate. But even then, your temporary disability rate could be less than what you're earning if you're more than a max earner in the first place.
Yeah, that would totally suck. So what do you do then?
Hope everything goes okay and you get a decent settlement quicker, sooner than later. But ultimately, that's the big problem is a lot of people there in a case where they're getting advanced permanent disability, but they can't go back to work yet because they're still treating, maybe they just had a surgery or something. And maybe they've exhausted their state disability, or maybe they've exhausted temporary disability, and so they're stuck trying to fend for themselves, living off of $290 a week.
And you can't get another job, and you are pretty much out of options.
Yeah, you could be really stuck in that position. You know, some people, at least the good part about permanent disability is technically you can be working at the same time you're receiving those benefits. Because unlike temporary disability, permanent disability is designed to compensate you for the residual functional impairment, not to make up for lost wages.
So say you can no longer be at 100% at any job because of that injury. So you're going to get paid, you know, if you got your arm sawed off, like the amount that, you know, you should have been given had you have both of your arms type of thing.
Kind of. So like you would be like, if you'd lost your arm, you would have the permanent disability for that. You would be back to work potentially. And then you could be receiving permanent disability advances for that rating for your lost arm. I think the reality is that most people start getting permanent disability advances or become permanent and stationary before they're able to return to work, before they really have had a chance to heal as much as possible. And they're really forced into a position where they're trying to find work because they have to, but they're not in a position where they can do most jobs that they were previously, you know, qualified for. Because, you know, if you're in construction, you saw your arm off, you're probably not going to do construction work anymore. You know? You can't all of a sudden just pivot and be like, you know, that's cool, I'm going to be a software engineer, or, you know, I'm going to just do a desk job or something like that. It's not that easy for a lot of people. So it's really stressful, I think, for a lot of people. And unfortunately, nothing's changed in the last 8 years. You know, unlike temporary disability, it hasn't moved at all. And the last time we got a change in permanent disability, it was kind of a slow change. It started in 2013 and it scaled into 2014 from 2012. But we had to give stuff up on applicant side. You know, we had to give up claims for psych, sleep, and sexual dysfunction secondary to physical injuries to get those higher permanent disability rates. And now there's talk of changing the permanent disability rates again, but the hot topic is cumulative trauma cases. And a lot of insurance companies want to get rid of the idea that you can file a post-termination cumulative trauma, meaning a case that you wanted to file after you've already been let go or quit a company or something like that. And there's a lot of cases where you don't know you have an injury until after you've left, which would be very detrimental to a lot of cases.
Exactly.
But it's horse trading. They want something for something, right? The legislature's not going to say, hey, you know what? We haven't changed permanent disability rates in 8 years. The poor injured workers, we should really help them out, you know? There's none of that kind of talk.
That's insane. So I guess that answers the question. You're pretty much, your hands are going to be tied up if essentially you're in a situation like that, because there is a max and there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing that can potentially kind of help is if you settle soon. So with the settlement, of course, you get that lump sum payment of what they should be paying as far as like operations or any surgeries that are going to be happening. They kind of give everything to you, like, here, deal with it and whatever your future is, and we'll move forward with not having to do anything for you. But in that case, if that person's not going to get a settlement soon, you have no option but to live off whatever it is that you're getting.
Yeah, unless you have like money saved, long-term disability, you get a new job.
What about Aflac? Aflac! What about that?
I think most people don't have that, but you know, it's there, I guess. I think a lot of people are put in a position where they really are forced into trying to settle. And we can fight on our end as lawyers to try and make up for that in some ways, like trying to increase the permanent disability rating, so that's more money, you know, but the rate itself changes. And so there's often cases where someone's getting, I think, the best rating that they should get, but the money side of it's still not enough because the temporary or the permanent disability rates are so bad.
Yeah. So if you do take this money, let's just say you're getting paid for the permanent disability or temporary disability, does that then, when you settle, come into play? Like, oh, so we gave you already this amount. Well, guess what? We're going to deduct that from the year and a half we've been giving you money for it. So that's not going to go in towards your settlement.
Yeah,
is that even a good
that
thing?
is another thing that comes up all the time. Ultimately, if there's permanent disability that's advanced throughout the case, the insurance gets credit for that when it's time to settle. So at least the legislature decided, hey, look, if the case is still going on and someone has permanent disability, that should start being paid to them. It shouldn't have to wait for a court decision or a settlement because they probably need it. Well, they also get credit for what they paid you, and that comes to a surprise for a lot of people, where maybe they got a permanent disability rating and then it took 6 months to get to court and have a trial and deal with things or settle. And now the insurance company says, oh, well, we'll give you $50,000 or $200,000 or whatever it is, but we want credit for, $40,000 of permanent disability advances. And they're legally entitled to it. It just comes as a surprise to most people because it's throughout the duration of the case that the insurance company actually has the obligation to start paying.
Which, by the way, we do have a video about credits in workers' comp, and we will obviously link that as well, so you guys can take a dive into that one. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yep.
So what happens in the case of you're not getting paid anything for a while, and whether it's they're trying to authorize it, whether shit's happening in your case, what happens then? Do you then start getting paid and then they pay you what they should have paid you since the get-go? Like, how does that work?
So there's a lot of cases where someone may not be paid, and there's a variety of reasons it happens. Usually if a case is denied, we tell people to apply for state disability through EDD. EDD will file a lien to get reimbursed from the insurance carrier once we get the case accepted. That's income that comes in. If you don't have EDD benefits, or you're not entitled to temporary disability and you've exhausted your permanent disability advances or don't have any available, and you're in a condition where you can't go back to work, then typically we'll advise people to consider applying for Social Security disability,
Gotcha.
Which comes into play, obviously, if you're injured to the extent that you can't hold down a job. Usually what happens, though, is if someone should have been paid permanent disability or temporary disability, and we get a doctor to weigh in on it, or there's a legal defense that we had to go to trial over and we get a decision later down the road, then the insurance company will have to pay retroactive benefits. So you can force them to go back and pay, a year of temporary disability that should have been paid if it wasn't, or if permanent disability at one point was lower and then we get a report from a doctor that says it's now higher, then we can get them to pay retroactive permanent disability based on the higher impairment rating.
Right. Okay. So we kind of got a glimpse as to what options do you have. Obviously, the whole thing about this podcast is to talk about why do they pay so little? There are a couple avenues that we kind of dived into that explain certain scenarios that you can essentially try to figure out if that's your case. What is another important thing someone should know as far as why workers' comp is paid at so little rate?
Call it politics, special interests, insurance lobbying, right? I think anyone who's been in workers' comp knows that it can be a dirty system on both sides. Unfortunately, the injured worker pays for it more often than not. The system is really not designed to be an end-all be-all benefit for them to get everything they need and recover from their injury. I think the system was designed to strike a balance between insurance interests, business interests, and individual interests. And really what's happened is it's become this amalgamation of rules and laws that don't really serve to help out anyone, and it makes it a mess. And I think people looking at workers' comp insurance from the perspective that it's there to help them and give them everything they need are sadly gonna be really awakened when they realize it's not. And I think we get feedback from people commenting on our channel and talking to us and stuff, and they're so disappointed with workers' comp and what it does for them, even in a best case scenario.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people struggling out there who have a really bad experience with workers' comp, and it's even worse for them.
Yeah, I know. We've had a couple of stories, like, Donnie Mozzetti was one, completely changed his world upside down. And it sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks because there are those people that are essentially going to really be injured to the point where they can't get another job, to where they can't even work while they're recovering. And then they're battling this nasty system and they're not getting anything for it. And it's just like you're waiting and waiting and waiting. 1 year goes by, 2 years go by. It affects your family. It affects your whole entire life.
Yeah.
People break up for that. People lose their kids because of that. Like,
I was just talking to someone this morning who lost their house.
Wow, that sucks, dude.
And they had gone to their doctor's appointment. They had missed a doctor's appointment because they had their child had COVID, and so they couldn't go in. The doctor's office didn't want to see them and didn't want to do telemedicine. So then the insurance company cut off their temporary disability, and it had been months. And my firm had to go to court and fight to get temporary disability picked up. But in between when they stopped and when she's getting paid is like 4 months now. And like, they don't care, at the end of the day, they just like, oh, okay, our mistake. Here's your check now, no big deal. But that doesn't take into account the damage it's done to her life and the time in between.
Yeah, that sucks. It's just a scenario, right, that could potentially I don't want to say it could happen to you, but it's just the way it is. So
Yeah, and I mean, look at it this way: temporary disability, for example. With exception to some injuries, there's a couple, special cases, but generally speaking, you only get up to 2 years of temporary disability, and that's only within 5 years from your date of injury. So, like, what happens if you've had like multiple back surgeries and you need more?
yeah,
Like, doesn't matter. What if you have, multiple shoulder surgeries, or you have, bilateral carpal tunnel and you have surgeries on both your wrists and, elbows and things like that, or you have, a knee replacement gone wrong that needs more surgery and rehab and stuff. Like, that's it. 2 years. That's all you get. It doesn't matter if you need 6 or 7 years to recover from your injury, which
Yeah.
is really sad.
I think the best scenario would be if you feel like you're going to fall off of something, if you feel like what you're doing at that moment could potentially injure yourself really, really bad, then don't do it.
Yeah.
And then you're in trouble. The boss is going to be like, you're not trying to do your job. And it's like, that's a whole nother game. But I think for your own benefit as a worker, I think about it sometimes when I'm picking even up a chair, I'm trying to move a furniture, like, let me just move this right out the way. Really think about it twice, because if you end up getting injured, it's not going to be beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, even with my own experience in dealing with workers' comp as a defense attorney, as a applicant's attorney, just seeing everything that happens when I'm like at home and I'm doing like a home project, my fiance will like say, "Oh, I hang something up," and I'll go grab this like janky chair, and then I'm thinking about it, and I'm like,
Never mind.
Actually, I had this case, and this person fell and they, broke their neck or whatever. Like, I think about that stuff every day, and so
Yeah.
I don't know that people really think about
Consequences.
the consequences and really being safe. But it's also more difficult when you have this, employer breathing down your neck, telling you to do something that's kind of sketchy or you think is dangerous, but you don't want to say no because, maybe you want that promotion, or maybe, someone else got fired because they didn't do something they were told to do. And you have this immense pressure, I think, to do your job. And I think a lot of people disregard a lot of safety rules and guidelines to just please their employer. But knowing what I know about workers' comp and how cheap the insurance carriers are and how little it pays and how difficult it can be, I try and tell people, like, be safe, avoid getting in the system as much as possible.
It's better that you lose the job, that promotion, than you be stuck in a scenario where you're injured, you can't go back to work, and you screw up the rest of your life. Like, I'd rather take a hit on that aspect as opposed to even getting myself into any workers' comp.
And the craziest part about workers' comp is the permanent disability rates do not factor in whether or not you are in a highly specialized field or in a highly paid job. And that means, like, let's say you're, a journeyman electrician or something, and you've been at, the company for a while and you make really good money, maybe you make a couple $100,000 a year or something wild. And all of a sudden you have a hand injury, you can't be an electrician anymore. The insurance doesn't care that you can no longer make that $200K a year or whatever it is, or $100K, really good money. They're just looking at it and say, okay, well, cool. Here's your, here's your job retraining voucher for $6,000. Here's your $25,000 permanent disability award, and you're done. Right? And it's like, well, what are you going to do now? Maybe you're mid-career, 30, 40 years old, and you have to pivot, and you have zero experience in any other field that you wouldn't even get paid half of what you made before. There's no liability. It doesn't matter.
It's a life-changing experience. It's exactly what we're talking about. So I guess the best thing to do is keep safe at work. If you are in the system, there's just so much to dive into. Make sure you get that legal help, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And I guess we just got to wish people best of luck.
Yeah, be safe and avoid workers' comp at all costs if you can.
Definitely.
To the extent you can't, though, be smart about it. Do your research, Google, talk to a lawyer, really understand what the system's about so that you go into it with the appropriate expectations.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people go into it thinking it's something it's not, especially with the compensation part. And they get to the end of the case and they're not prepared for the next steps in their life. And so I think part of going through a workers' comp is anticipating what's coming down the pipe and knowing what you have available to you for remedies and using that to the best you can then to pivot to the next stage in your life post-recovery.
And if someone's watching the video right now and they could say something along the lines of, well, my friend got so-and-so and they got really compensated. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say when there are high numbers given and compensated within the workers' comp system, look at the person's lifestyle now. It's most likely someone that's in severe pain, mm-hmm. has lost a limb, or is on a wheelchair.
Yeah, and every case is different. I think I've done some cases where I was surprised that the insurance company said yes to what I was asking for. It really depends on who the adjuster is, whether they're really nice or really upset, they hate the client, whatever the case may be, bitter. The defense attorneys, some just see it as claims processing. Some act like, the injured workers are trying to steal money from their parents' wallet, and everything in between. And even then, the type of injuries, my favorite ones I hear, oh, well, my friend got a cut finger and he got, $2 million. And I have a torn rotator cuff and I'm only getting $50,000. It's like, okay, well, what's going on here with your friend? Did their cut finger turn into, an infection, which means they had to have their arm amputated, and then they went into a coma or something like that. There's always these war stories where someone always got more. And those may be true, but you don't necessarily know all the facts of the case. It may be a really liberal adjuster. It could be a chill defense attorney. It could be, a number of things that really affect the value of the case.
Yeah.
And you could give 10 different lawyers the same exact case, and I guarantee, depending on which doctors are available, who the QME or AME is, the judge, the adjusters, and all that stuff, every single one of those lawyers will have a different result.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally see something like that happening because we see it all the time. So without further ado, I think that's pretty much why workers' comp pays so little. It just sucks, and that's what it is. So highly recommend you follow us everywhere on social media, subscribe to us on all of your favorite pod platforms. That way you get notifications every time we dump new content. And definitely hit us up on social media. We do have other tips that we share and other videos. So thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of Work Comp Talk.